This video is going to walk you through an example of Lab 2. I have equations here that will be different than the equations you will be using, but other than that, the examples that we're going to do here will be exactly the kind of thing you have to do on your lab. So the first one says find the revenue function, and we talked about this in class, and you actually already had to turn in part 1 to your lab. So remember, revenue is equal to the price times the number of items, in this case widgets. So I'll just kind of type this in here, that my revenue function would equal number of units or widgets times the price, which in my example up here, my price is given by 800 minus 0.04x. So that would equal 800x minus 0.04x squared, and make that box square there. So that is my revenue function. So now what we're going to do in Excel is we're going to create 3 columns for the number of widgets, the revenue, and the cost. So you need an Excel workbook open, and our first column is going to be X for the number of widgets, and then R of X for revenue, and C of X for the cost. I like to highlight the whole row, and I'll make that bold because it's a title of the column, and I'll highlight the entire spreadsheet. So I highlighted that whole row by just going over to the 1 and tapping on that. You can highlight a whole spreadsheet if you go to the upper left-hand corner and tap here. And I'm going to choose that all of my cells will be centered. So I'm going to tap on the center right up here. And again, that's just a personal preference. So X, revenue, and cost. So back to the assignment, it says for the X values, let X vary on my example from 0 to 20,000. And I'm supposed to choose step sizes for X so that I get at least 20 to 25 data points. So for me, step sizes of 1,000 should be appropriate. So I'm going to start with 0, 1,000, 2,000, and I could keep typing until I get to 20,000, but there's a quick way in Excel to create a quick list. If you highlight both boxes at once and then hover in the lower right hand corner until you get that little cross, hold down with your left mouse button and drag, you can see there it's changing in that little box, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000. So it's going to pull all the way down to 20,000. So you could enter the numbers on their own, or again, quick numbering is a double highlight, hover, and click and drag. Now, revenue. We're about to tell Excel to basically input a math formula. And every time we want to make Excel do a mathematical formula or some sort of computation, we start with an equal sign. And my revenue function was negative 0.04, so negative 0.04 times, and instead of x squared, x is now my column A. So I'm going to cell reference by tapping on cell A2, and squared would be shift 6, 2, so to the second power, and it was negative 0.04x squared plus 800x. So continuing, plus 800 times, and again, I don't want to type x in Excel. You can either tap on the cell or you could enter it manually as cell A2. So you look up at this formula bar up at the top, and that's telling you the formula that we just entered here, so you can see it 2 places. And so there it is, negative 0.04 times x is my cell reference, squared, plus 800x is my cell reference. And then we'll hit enter. Now we go back up to that cell that we just typed that formula in. Again, when you're at a cell and you want to see what's happening in that cell, you look at the formula bar. And we're now going to hover in the lower right-hand corner, hold down with our left mouse button, and drag to fill that column. So it's always a good idea after you've dragged to fill a column to go to some cells. So here I am in cell B9, and I can read what's happening in cell B9 to make sure it makes sense. Well, this is exactly what I wanted, negative 0.04 times cell A9 squared plus 800 times cell A9. So it's taking all of these values and it's doing the computation on the revenue. Similarly, we're going to do the computation for the cost column. So if we're going to make Excel do some math, we start with an equals. And the cost function on my example is 300,000 plus 200x. So going back, I have 200 times, again, x is my cell reference, starting with A2. So 200x plus 300,000. So plus 300,000. Okay, that's the equation I want. I hit enter. And I go back up to that cell that I just formatted. So I put a nice little formula in there. And once you put a formula into a cell with a cell reference, this is the beauty of Excel, hover in the lower right-hand corner till you get that little cross. Hold down with your left mouse button and drag to fill that column. Again, a little spot check, make sure it's doing what I want it to do. So here I am in cell C15, and the formula is 200 times cell A15 plus 300,000, and that's exactly what I wanted to do. So that's how we create, for number 2, the columns of the X, the revenue, and the cost. Then it would say to copy and paste this into your Word document. All you would have to do would be to highlight, holding down with the left mouse button, and then you could right-click and select copy. And then when you would go into a Word document, you could right-click paste. I'm not going to be pasting these into a Word document, but that's how you would do it. So moving along, number 3 says we're supposed to graph these functions. And let's go back and take a look at how that would work. So highlight, holding down with your left mouse button, the data. Then we're going to go up to the ribbon at the top, Insert, and we're going to go to the charts in the center, and I want to do a scatter plot, and I want to see the options here. So I'm going to hit that arrow. And I want to do one of these last couple of options here. And it doesn't matter which one. If you want to see your data points, you could certainly leave those, or you could make it smooth without the data points. I'll leave the data points. I think either one would be great here. So we'll select that option. So as I look at my graph that I've created, I said on the lab that I want you to have a title, which it does, but I also want labels on the X and the Y axis. So right next to the chart, there's a little plus sign. It says Chart Elements. So tap on that with your left mouse button, and you get an option here for axis titles. So select that box, and you now see some axis titles have appeared. So you can type directly into those boxes. So on the horizontal axis, I have the number of widgets, and on my vertical axis, I have dollars. My title could be revenue and cost, because they're both on the graph. And the last thing I want to do is to edit this legend. I want series 1 to say revenue, and I want series 2 to say cost. So tap on that legend, and then tap again right onto the series 1, and then right-click. When you right-click, you should see an option to select data. And now we're selected on series 1, and I want to edit series 1. So here's a place where I can change the name to revenue. Okay. Then we'll go down to series 2, hit edit, and change that title, that name, to cost. Okay, and okay. So here I now have a pretty nice looking graph. that is giving me the number of widgets in the horizontal dollars, and I have a graph of the revenue and the cost, everything labeled nicely. So you would then right-click and highlight on the graph, right-click and copy, and then you would paste that into your Word document as well. So that would be number 3. Number 4, after you actually have your printout that you're going to turn in, you can just with a pen or pencil locate the places where revenue equals cost and also indicate the regions of profit and loss. So looking back at that graph, I would just with my pen or pencil is fine, say there's one place where revenue and cost are equal, here's another place. And now thinking about the regions of profit and loss, well, the region of the center of the graph is where the revenue is greater than the cost. So from here over, which you could just draw with your pencil, would be a region of profit. I'm bringing in more than I'm spending. But there's actually 2 regions of loss. This portion of the graph right here, so from 0 widgets to, an approximation, maybe I don't know, 500 widgets or something. So between here and here, you would just maybe write on your paper, that's a region of loss because the cost is more than the revenue. Then you would write from here to here would be a region of profit because revenue is greater than cost. And lastly, from here on, so that's what I'm looking for, and you can just write that with pen or pencil on your actual printout. Now we're going to find the profit function. And you should have already turned this in with part 1 of your lab, but remember that profit is equal to revenue minus cost. So on this one, we already saw that our revenue function was this negative 0.04 x squared plus 800x. That was our revenue function. So how much money I am bringing in minus my cost function, which is how much I'm spending, which is the 200x plus 300,000. So remember, there's implied parentheses here, the second set being most important, because I need to know that in that second set of parentheses, I have to distribute through this negative. So it's negative 200x minus 300,000. So my profit ends up being, as a simplified function, I have this negative 0.04 x squared, and when I combine my x terms, 800 minus 200 is going to give me 600x minus 300,000. So there's my profit function. Now I have 2 choices back in Excel to actually, in number 6 here, create a table of values for the profit. So making a 4th column for P of X for profit, I can either enter the function that I just discovered profit to be every time there's an X cell referencing the column A for widgets, or I can really just use my columns that I already have for revenue and cost. Profit is equal to revenue minus cost. So I think that's the approach I'd like to take here because it's simply less typing. So profit is equal to, I will cell reference revenue minus cell reference tap on cost, or you can type those in, B2 minus C2. Hit enter. We just used a formula, so we go back to that cell, hover in the lower right hand corner, get the little cross, and another option to the click and drag is actually to hover and double click with your left mouse button. That will also fill a column. So again, this nice spot check, make sure it's always doing the revenue minus the cost that you wanted it to, and it is. So this would be my column of profits. So this is also supposed to be copy and pasted into your Word document. As a note, you can highlight column A, and then if you don't want to take B and C, you can hit the Control button, and then with your left mouse button, that would let you highlight column D. And again, you could right-click copy and right-click paste into your Word document. Number 7 is going to ask you to graph that profit function. So let's go back and graph that. I'm going to make this graph a little smaller here. All right, so to graph profit, we're going to highlight just the data in column A. And then again, going over to column D, I'm going to hold down Control and then left mouse button highlights the numbers in column D. Again, up at the top ribbon, Insert. Want to go to the scatter plot, and we'll use the same type of plot, the second to the last option. Again, either of these would be fine. So here is my graph that's going to give me profit. So once again, I'd like to go to my chart options here, or chart elements, and I want to have axis titles. So now I have those options. So I'm going to have my x-axis be, again, number of widgets. And on my vertical axis, I'm going to have that, since it's just one graph this time, not two different curves, I could call it profit, but I'm just going to stay with dollars, like the last graph. And then I'll describe in the title the fact that this is the profit. So technically this graph is okay. We could leave it this way. There's nothing really wrong with it. But I really don't think I need all of this negative y-axis. So if you wanted to get rid of some of this and you wanted to change the scales, so notice if you tap on your y-axis numbers, you get a box there. Now, depending on what version of Excel you're working in, maybe the options don't automatically appear over here at the right-hand side when you tap on that y-axis. So let's say those weren't there. When you tap on the y-axis on older versions of Excel, if you right-click, you should get an option to format your axis. And then here it pops up to the right. In older versions, it'll pop up as a separate box. But we're going to change our min and max here, in particular the min. So I think if we start maybe just right down here at what looks like -1 million, so -1 million instead of -5 million. And that looks a little more reasonable. I think we'll just leave it like that. Maybe after seeing that, I'm even tempted to go up to -50,000, but that's fine. I think that looks pretty good. And I'm going to do the same thing on the x-axis. So I'm going to tap on the x-axis numbers, and notice I have my options here on the right. Again, if you're in an older version of Excel and you don't see that, tap on the horizontal axis and right-click, and you'll see an option to format the axis. So let's, I think, just go over to 20,000 instead of 25,000. Maybe I don't need all the way over to 25,000. And I think that might, oops, what did I do there? Oh, I have one too many zeros. Excuse me. So I think just going over to 20,000 is more appropriate. So that's a pretty good graph. I like the looks of that. And that would be my profit graph, that for number 7, you would again copy and paste that into your Word document. So you would right-click, copy, and paste into Word. Then you're also asked just to, on the paper, you can just use a pen or a pencil, locate the maximum profit, and to just give an approximation of that profit and the number of widgets that would produce that max profit. So after you've pasted that into your Word document, you would just, with your pen or pencil, just kind of make a big dot here saying that's where max profit is. And maybe I estimate that max profit, maybe I think it occurs at 7,000 widgets, and maybe I guess that it is about 100 or 1.9 million. Maybe that would be my estimate for what that profit would be. So that would be something else that you would have for that exercise number 8. Number 9 is to find the marginal profit function. Again, if you turned in part 1 of your lab, you should already have that done and corrected. So P prime, I'll just type this down here. Here was P at the top, so that derivative would be negative 0.08x plus 600. So for number 10, we want to make a table of values now with the marginal profit. So back in Excel, column E, let's call that P prime of x, again, equals, and I keep forgetting, negative 0.08x plus 600. So negative 0.08 times, and again, instead of x, we cell reference the x column, and then plus 600, and hit enter. Go back up to that cell, hover in the lower right-hand corner, and either click and drag or double-click. So we have a nice column of values here, and those represent the values of the marginal profit function, or the derivative of the profit. Again, copy and paste that table. So on number 10, you would highlight column A, and then control, highlight column E, right-click copy, right-click paste into your Word document. All right, number 11 asks, profit will be maximized when marginal profit is equal to what value? And then using your table that we just created in 10, give the most accurate range for the number of widgets that would maximize profits. So profit is maximized. We've done quite a few examples of these in class. Profit is maximized when its derivative, its slope of the tangent line, its marginal profit is equal to 0. So that's the first portion of that question, realizing that we're interested in where marginal profit is equal to 0. And so when we look back at our table here, to give the most accurate range for when the marginal profit, P prime, would equal 0, well, it changes from positive to negative, indicating profit was increasing and then profit was decreasing, and it changes somewhere between 7 and 8,000. So when I look at what's happening here, marginal profit will be 0 somewhere between 7,000 and 8,000 widgets, which again was roughly where we estimated that our max profit would be. So that should make sense. So that would be my best estimate at that point. So that would be number 11. And then finally, number 12, we're actually going to determine where that marginal profit is equal to 0. And you have two options. You can certainly just do this by hand. It wouldn't be too hard to set that linear equation right there equal to 0. But I just want to show you how you could also do that in Excel. There's a command called goal seek that actually would solve an equation. So let's use Excel to actually answer that. So back on our spreadsheet here, I just need a couple of empty cells. So I'll just kind of come to the bottom right here. And I'm going to put a couple titles on what I'm about to do here. So an X and then a P prime of X. All right, so underneath the P prime, this is where I want to enter my marginal profit function. So equals, and remember, marginal profit was negative 0.08x plus 600. So negative 0.08 times, and then I'm going to cell reference this empty cell, plus 600. So this is my variable, this empty cell right here, cell J22. That's the variable that I'm going to try to solve for. So that's why right now I've cell referenced an empty cell. So I'm going to hit enter. So right now, of course, it is going to give me back 600 because I've just cell referenced, again, there's what's in that cell. I've cell referenced J22, which is empty. So when I have a 0 here, obviously that's equal to 600. But now what we want to do is we're going to go up to our top ribbon here, and under the Data tab, there's a command called What If Analysis. And underneath of What If Analysis, you'll find Goal Seek. So this is essentially a little equation solver. So we're trying to set cell K22, or wherever you have entered in your formula for your marginal profit. So K22, that's right. And I want to set that equal to what value? Well, I want to set it equal to 0 by changing the cell or solving for whatever cell you cell referenced and you hit that empty cell, that's what you want to have here. So I had hit cell J22, so that's the cell that I want to change. It's my variable. And then hit OK. And now it has solved that equation for me. It tells me that my widgets are 7,500. That looks good graphically. That is when my marginal profit will equal 0. So using the Goal Seek feature, I have actually determined that the number of widgets to maximize profit is 7,500 widgets. Again, I won't know if you use this or not, and you don't have to. You're welcome to just set that equation equal to 0 and solve it by hand. Finally, number 13, last question, determine the maximum profit. So we have found the number of widgets to maximize profit. We now want to determine actually what that profit is actually equal to. So remember, your profit function was equal to, profit was up here, negative 0.04x squared. So negative 0.04 times hitting the 7,500 squared plus 600x, so plus 600 times, again, that 7,500 cell, and minus 300,000, minus 300,000, enter. Again, you could just do that in your calculator. That would be fine also, but here's where I get that my max profit is going to be 1,950,000. So just under that 2 million, so that looks totally appropriate. So that would be my final answer to question number 13. So if you have any questions on anything with your lab, which will be doing the same types of things we did here, but with different equations, be sure to come see me in my office hours, and I'd be happy to sit down and take a look at what you have. You should get functions that look very similar to what we have here. And if you're not, if things look drastically different, then you probably have an error someplace. So please come see me if you have any questions.